The wind carried dust and the scent of blood across the canyon. The late sun burned low, a red coin pressed against the sky, and the desert was quiet except for the soft scrape of boots against dry stone. Elara Boone crouched beside a rock, her gloved fingers brushing the crimson stains that darkened the sand. They were still wet. Someone had passed this way only minutes ago. Her breath hitched as she lifted her eyes to the horizon. A silhouette staggered through the desert brush ahead. Moving unevenly, one hand clutched against his side. Even from a distance, she could tell he was Apache. The dark braids, the bare chest streaked with dust and blood. The way he moved with pride despite the pain. She had seen men die before. The frontier was cruel to everyone, white, native, or otherwise, but there was something about this man that held her gaze longer than it should have. Maybe it was because she'd watched him from afar before, for 3 weeks. He had lingered near the canyon trails that cut behind her small homestead, a silent watcher among the rocks. She had never confronted him, though her rifle always rested across her knees at night. But yesterday, she'd heard gunfire echo through the valley. Today she found his blood. Now she was following him. The wind caught her coat as she climbed over a ridge. Each footprint he left behind was heavy, erratic, but purposeful. He wasn't fleeing. He was heading somewhere. The sun dipped behind the mesas, and shadows began to stretch long across the land. Coyotes started howling in the distance, their cries bouncing off canyon walls. Elara's heart pounded harder. Something about this chase didn't feel right anymore. She wasn't hunting a wounded man, she was being led. Still, she pressed on. Her horse, a chestnut mare named Lark, snorted nervously as they entered a narrow pass. The stone walls rose high on either side, and the air felt colder. The Apache's trail led straight through. A few yards ahead, the blood drops thickened, then stopped. Elara slid from her saddle, rifle in hand, eyes sweeping the shadows. Nothing moved. Not a sound but the faint rattle of wind through the rocks. Then a whisper. Not in English. Her pulse jumped. She spun toward the sound, finger on the trigger, but saw only the flicker of a torchlight deeper in the canyon. She hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. She'd come too far to turn back. The torchlight disappeared around a bend. She followed on foot. The walls of the canyon narrowed until she had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The air smelled of smoke and sage. Her boots crunched over bones, animal, not human. She hoped. When the passage opened again, she stopped dead in her tracks. Below her stretched a hidden hollow, a small, natural basin surrounded by red rock cliffs. At its center burned a fire, low but steady, and beside it lay the wounded Apache. His body glistened with sweat, his chest rising shallowly. Blood soaked the bandage tied around his ribs, but that wasn't what froze her. Kneeling beside him were 3 other Apaches. 2 men, silent and watchful, and 1 older woman who held a small carved bowl, mixing something dark, herbs maybe, or medicine. Their faces turned toward Elara as one. Her rifle trembled in her grip. The woman spoke softly in Apache, a voice heavy with sorrow, and the wounded man turned his head toward Elara. Their eyes met, his dark, piercing, full of exhaustion yet defiance. He said something she couldn't understand, and one of the other men raised a hand toward her. Not in threat, but in warning. Elara realized then she hadn't followed a dying man into the desert. She had walked straight into a ceremony, and as the firelight flickered against the rocks, she noticed something carved into the stone behind them. Symbols. Circles and a handprint painted in blood. The air felt heavier, charged, like the land itself was holding its breath. She didn't know it yet. But that moment, standing on the edge of that sacred hollow, would change everything she believed about life, death, and the people she thought she understood. The wounded Apache whispered again, this time in English. You shouldn't have come here." Elara lowered her rifle, but her heart beat harder. The night had just begun, and the truth hiding in that canyon would shatter her world before dawn. Elara Boone stood frozen at the edge of the hollow, the fire's glow licking across her face like a whisper of heat and warning. The wounded Apache's words echoed in her ears, "You shouldn't have come here." Her instinct screamed to turn back, to ride away. But curiosity, the same stubborn fire that had kept her alive in a land that swallowed the weak, held her ground. The older Apache woman muttered something under her breath, dipping her fingers into the dark mixture in the bowl and smearing it across the warrior's wound. The scent of sage and iron filled the air. Elara's eyes drifted across the stone walls around them. They weren't random carvings. They were old symbols. Spirals, hands, and sunbursts painted in ochre and ash. Some were fresh, others weathered by time. She could almost feel them pulsing, alive with stories the desert had buried long ago. The wounded warrior stared back at her. His jaw was strong, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, black and burning, carried something more than pain. Something that warned her not to speak, not to move closer. The woman said something to him in Apache. He nodded weakly and turned his gaze back to Elara. "You follow blood," he said hoarsely. "But blood follows you too." Elara frowned. "You're hurt. I can help you." He cut her off with a cough, wincing. "You've done enough? Go." "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said. Her voice softened, even though her rifle still hung ready in her hand. "I saw you shot. I thought you'd die out here." One of the other men stepped forward, tall and fierce, his chest marked with white paint. "He does not die," he said bluntly. "Not until it is done." Elara's pulse quickened. "Until what is done?" None of them answered. The old woman continued her ritual, humming softly. The tune rose and fell like the wind. It wasn't a song Elara had ever heard, but somehow it stirred something in her chest, a hollow ache she couldn't name. The wounded warrior's breathing slowed. His hand trembled, then rested against the earth beside him. He whispered something to the woman, who nodded solemnly and reached for a small pouch near the fire. She sprinkled a handful of fine white powder into the flames. They hissed, flared blue, and the canyon walls flickered with moving shadows. Then, for a heartbeat, Elara saw something impossible. The symbols carved into the rock, they glowed. Not faintly, but bright enough to cast light across the hollow. The handprint painted in blood seemed to shift. Stretching outward like it wanted to reach her dot, she stumbled back. "What in God's name?" The older woman turned toward her and spoke for the first time in English. Her voice was raspy, like dry leaves. "You stand where spirits walk, white woman. This ground remembers." Elara tightened her grip on the rifle. "Spirits? I don't believe in ghost stories." The woman's dark eyes glimmered. "Belief is for the living. Memory is for the land." The wind moaned through the canyon, scattering ash from the fire. Elara's horse, Lark, neighed nervously from beyond the pass, as if warning her again to leave. But she couldn't. She had seen too much, and not enough. The wounded warrior's voice broke the silence once more. "You think you followed me," he said quietly. "But it was the canyon that called you." Elara shook her head. "I don't understand." He tried to sit up, grimacing. "You will." Before she could reply, one of the other warriors suddenly lifted his head. His gaze snapped toward the cliffs above them. He muttered something urgent. Elara heard it too. Faint echoes of hooves, horses, multiple. The old woman's song stopped. Everyone froze. The wounded man's eyes sharpened. "They come for me. Who?" Elara asked. "The ones who shot," he said. "The ones who dig for what is buried." Elara looked toward the ridge, her heart hammering. Whoever they were close, and she was trapped between them and these Apaches. In a sacred canyon she didn't understand. The wounded man reached for a stone, knife beside him, and met her gaze one last time before the sound of hooves thundered closer. "If you wish to live," he whispered, "do not stand against us. Stand with the truth when it comes." Then the first bullet cracked through the night. The fire roared. The canyon erupted into chaos. Gunfire split the night like lightning tearing through silence. Elara Boone dropped to one knee behind a boulder as sparks from the fire scattered in every direction. The first bullet hit the stone beside her, chipping dust into her face. The Apache men moved fast, too fast for their wounds. The tall one with white paint across his chest dragged the wounded warrior toward the titigi shadows while the older woman snuffed out the flames with a heavy blanket of sand. Smoke billowed upward, cloaking the canyon in darkness. "Get down," the woman hissed. Elara obeyed without thinking. She had no stake in their fight, but the instinct to survive ran deep. She pressed her rifle against her shoulder, eyes searching the ridge. Figures appeared against the starlight. 3, maybe 4 men on horseback. Not soldiers, not riders from any ranch she knew. Their silhouettes were ragged, lawless, raiders perhaps. Or something worse. The leader shouted from above, "You think you can hide him, old witch? Bet gold ain't Apache anymore." Gold. Elara's gut twisted. That was what this was about. Not revenge, not land, treasure. Always treasure. The woman muttered a curse under her breath and reached for something near the fire, a pouch of dark powder. She threw it into the air. It erupted in a burst of smoke so thick Elara couldn't see her own hand. The Apaches melted into it like ghosts. The men on the ridge fired blindly, bullets whining off the stone. Elara crawled backward, coughing, her hat slipping from her head. She didn't understand why she hadn't run yet. She could have mounted her horse and ridden home. But something in that wounded warrior's eyes had tethered her. The smoke began to clear. One of the raiders slid down the canyon wall, shouting orders. His face caught the firelight, rough, scarred, and familiar. Elara froze. "Jack Hensley," she whispered. She knew that name. Everyone in the territories did. A bounty hunter turned outlaw, known for digging up Apache burial grounds for gold and artifacts. And she'd seen him once, standing outside the town saloon, bragging about a map carved in stone. The same map, she realized, that might be hidden in this canyon. Hensley's voice rang out. "You can't keep what's buried. Boy, that treasure belongs to whoever's got the gun to claim it." The wounded Apache pushed himself upright, leaning on the rock for balance. The firelight revealed the blood-soaked bandage around his ribs, and yet his voice was steady, almost calm. "You dig graves," he said, his accent thick but his words clear. "You never see what sleeps beneath." Hensley laughed, aiming his rifle. "Oh, I'll see plenty when you're gone." Before he could fire, Elara raised her own rifle and shot first. The bullet struck Hensley's hat clean off his head, sending him stumbling backward. Silence fell. Every eye turned to her. Elara's. Breath came fast, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear herself speak. "You come one step closer," she warned, "and I'll make sure the next shot finds your skull." Hensley's men exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody expected a lone woman to be standing with Apaches, least of all him. "You're digging your own grave, lady," Hensley spat. "Better than digging someone else's," she shot back. The tall Apache moved swiftly, flanking the ridge. He whistled sharply, and from somewhere unseen, more shadows shifted. 3 more Apaches emerged from the darkness, bows drawn tight. The raiders didn't stay to test their luck. They fired a few last wild shots and retreated into the desert night. The echo of their hooves faded into the wind. When the canyon finally fell quiet again, Elara lowered her rifle. The old woman approached her, face unreadable. "You shoot not for blood, But for truth, she said. Elara shook her head. I don't even know what the truth is anymore. The wounded Apache stepped forward, his breathing ragged. You will, he said. Come morning. He gestured. Toward the carved wall, the one with the glowing symbols and the handprint painted in blood. He pressed his palm against it, whispering something in his native tongue. The stone shifted. A faint rumble echoed beneath their feet as part of the wall slid open, revealing a dark passage. The smell of earth and something ancient poured out. Elara's pulse jumped. What is that? The Apache looked at her with tired, haunted eyes. What your people have forgotten. What mine died to protect. He stepped into the darkness. The old woman turned to Elara. If you follow, you must not speak. The dead do not like questions. Elara swallowed hard, gripping her rifle. Then she took a deep breath and followed them inside. The air inside the canyon wall was thick, heavy with earth and time. The flickering torchlight cast shifting shadows on the tunnel's stone walls as Elara Boone followed the wounded Apache deeper underground. The air grew colder with each step, yet sweat clung to her back. Behind her, the older Apache woman moved silently, carrying a bowl of smoldering sage. Its smoke curled through the darkness like ghostly fingers. Ahead of them, the tall warrior led the way, his painted chest gleaming under the faint glow of firelight. Elara's heartbeat echoed in her ears. The narrow passage opened suddenly into a vast chamber, and her breath caught. The ceiling arched high above, carved by hand centuries ago. Torches flickered along the walls, illuminating hundreds of markings, spirals, suns, and lines etched deep into the stone. In the center lay a stone table, long and wide, covered in ancient cloths and symbols painted in red. Around it stood wooden idols of men, animals, and shapes she didn't recognize. The wounded Apache stopped beside the table, his face solemn. He placed his hand upon it as if greeting something sacred. Elara hesitated at the threshold. What is this place? She whispered. The older woman's voice was soft but steady. This is where the land remembers. Elara frowned. Remembers what? The wounded man turned his gaze to her, eyes dark as river mud. The beginning. And the betrayal. He gestured for her to come closer. Despite her fear, she stepped forward. Her boots echoed softly on the stone floor. The tall warrior lit 2 torches near the center, revealing carvings along the table, not random etchings but a story told in symbols. Warriors, settlers, and rivers of blood. She realized it wasn't just art, it was a record. The old woman placed the sage bowl near the head of the table. The smoke curled upward, and for a moment, it seemed to form faces, fleeting, whispering, vanishing. Elara's throat went dry. You said people are digging for something buried here. The wounded Apache nodded. They dig for gold. But what they seek is older. The white man came with shovels, not hearts. He winced, pressing a hand to his ribs, then motioned to the carvings. Long ago your people came. They took what we buried, bones, idols, and stones that should have slept. This canyon was sealed to keep them safe. But they came again. Elara looked closer at one carving, a wagon, a cross, men with rifles. Her stomach turned. My people. The woman interrupted gently. The land has no sides, only scars. For the first time since she followed him, Elara saw a hint of sorrow behind the warrior's pride. They shot me because I found what they feared, he said. They feared truth more than bullets. Elara frowned. What truth? He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out something wrapped in hide. Carefully, he unrolled it, revealing a smooth stone tablet etched with patterns similar to those on the wall. Only now, in the torchlight, Elara could see they formed a map, not of land, but of rivers and burial grounds. This, he said, is what they kill for. Elara stared at it. You're saying there's treasure? The old woman's eyes narrowed. Treasure is what fools call memory. Before she could ask more, a deep rumble shook the ground above them. Dust rained from the ceiling. The tall Apache spun toward the tunnel entrance, his hand gripping his knife. They return, he muttered. Galera's stomach dropped. Hensley? The wounded warrior's jaw tightened. He will not stop. Not until he bleeds this canyon dry. The old woman stepped between them, her presence commanding silence. Then the canyon must choose its keepers. She handed Elara a small clay charm shaped like a sunburst. If you walk out alive, carry this. It will burn in your hand if you lie to the land. Elara hesitated, then took it. The charm was warm, pulsing faintly, as if alive. The wounded warrior looked at her again. You followed blood into this place. Now blood will follow you out. What side you stand on will decide who remembers your name. The rumble grew louder. Hoofbeats. Echoes of men shouting. Elara gripped her rifle. Then we stand together, she said firmly. The tall warrior nodded, admiration flickering in his eyes. As the chamber filled with the sound of boots and guns approaching, Elara realized something she never had before. She was no longer just a woman surviving the frontier. She had stepped into a story older than any town, any law, any claim. And tonight, it was demanding an ending. The rumble of boots and hooves grew louder, shaking dust from the carved ceiling. Elara Boone's pulse thundered in rhythm with the approaching chaos. The wounded Apache gripped his knife tighter, his long black hair hanging loose, streaked with sweat and blood. The torchlight painted fire across his skin, glinting off the turquoise and bone jewelry on his chest. The older Apache woman muttered prayers in her language, her voice low and steady like the hum of the earth itself. They come for what they do not understand, she said. We will show them the price of waking the dead. Elara raised her rifle. Then let's make sure they pay it. The tall warrior gave a sharp nod, signaling his kin. Two of them disappeared into the dark tunnels branching from the main chamber. The wounded Apache turned to Elara. Stay behind the stone table. If they find this place, do not let them touch what lies within. Before she could ask what he meant, the ground shook again, the echo of boots entering the passage. Hensley's voice cut through the dark. Come on, boys. That witch can't hide her secrets forever. The old woman looked to Elara. When the blood touches the stone, the truth will rise. Elara didn't understand, but there was no time to question. The first of Hensley's men burst through the tunnel, firing blindly. The shot ricocheted off the wall, sending sparks through the air. Elara fired back, the rifle's blast deafening in the confined space. One of the raiders fell hard against the wall. The wounded Apache lunged forward with a snarl, his knife flashing. He moved with astonishing power for a man half dead, slashing, striking, defending the chamber like it was the heart of the world itself. Hensley appeared behind his men, revolver raised. You should have stayed out of this, Boone, he shouted. Ain't no law out here but mine. Elara gritted her teeth. I've seen what your kind calls law. She fired again, forcing him to duck. The tall Apache warrior grabbed a fallen rifle and joined her. The air filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder, the walls echoing with each shot. Then, amid the chaos, Elara heard something strange, a low hum coming from the stone table. She turned and saw it vibrating faintly, the red markings glowing brighter. The old woman chanted louder, her voice weaving through the gunfire. The land remembers. The land bleeds with us. The wounded Apache stumbled, a bullet grazing his shoulder. He fell against the stone table, his blood splattering across the carvings. The glow flared like lightning. Elara shielded her eyes as the entire chamber trembled. A wind, cold and dry as bone, burst from the cracks in the floor, swirling the torches and scattering ash into the air. The raiders froze. Even Hensley lowered his gun for a moment, eyes wide. What in hell? The glowing carvings on the walls shifted, the spirals turning, the handprints pulsing like living hearts. From deep within the earth came a sound, not a voice, but 1,000 whispers layered together. It was as if the canyon itself was speaking. The old woman fell to her knees, tears running down her face. They wake. The ones who built this place. They know who has blood in their hands. Elara looked to the wounded Apache. His eyes glistened with pain, but also with something like relief. "It is done," he said softly. "The canyon remembers." The raiders panicked. One of them screamed and fired into the air before bolting for the tunnel. The ground shook harder, stones falling from the ceiling. Hensley shouted over the chaos. "You curse the ground. You'll all die here." Elara stepped forward, rifle still smoking. "Maybe, but you'll die knowing what you dug up." A jagged crack split the floor, glowing red-hot. Hensley backed away, eyes darting wildly. "Gold's mine!" he shouted, before turning and running for the exit. He didn't make it. The crack widened beneath his boots, swallowing him whole. His scream echoed once, then vanished into the earth. The rumbling slowly faded. The smoke began to settle. The glow dimmed until only the torchlight remained. Elara stood there, breathless, heart racing, staring at the blood-stained table. "What did we just do?" she whispered. The old woman looked up at her. "You didn't destroy it. You fed it truth. That is what the land hungers for." The wounded Apache sank against the wall, his strength nearly gone. "The curse is broken. But so am I." Elara knelt beside him. "No," she said softly. "You're alive. That's enough for now." He met her gaze. "You carry the charm?" She nodded, touching the clay sunburst hanging around her neck. It was cold now, no longer pulsing. "Then the canyon knows your heart," he said faintly. "It will remember your name." As the first light of dawn crept through the tunnel, Elara helped the Apaches out into the morning. Behind them, the stone passage sealed itself with a deep groan, as if the earth was closing its wound. But the sound that followed wasn't silence. It was breath, the slow, deep exhale of a canyon finally at peace. The blood moon rose over the canyon like a bleeding wound in the sky. Its red light spilled across the cliffs and turned the world into a fevered dream. Elara Boone stood at the mouth of a cavern, her rifle slung across her shoulder, the night wind tangling her hair. Behind her, the desert stretched out in endless silence, and before her, shadows danced around the firelight that pulsed from within the cave. Inside, the Apache warrior Ketten knelt before a carved stone altar, his bare chest streaked with crimson war paint and the sheen of sweat. His long black hair hung over his shoulders like a dark river, and his turquoise necklaces glimmered faintly in the torchlight. Elara hesitated before stepping closer, her boots crunching over sand and bone dust. Ketten turned slightly, his eyes glowing like amber under the moonlight that filtered through a hole in the cave's roof. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice low and deep, the tone between warning and gratitude. Elara raised her chin. "You'd be dead if I hadn't. I saw those raiders trailing you." They were ready to finish what they started. He studied her for a long moment, his breath shallow but steady. "A woman who tracks death should not follow it twice," he murmured. She smirked faintly. "I'm not tracking death. I'm tracking truth." That made him pause. He turned fully now, and for the first time, she saw the ritual scar over his heart, a symbol carved into flesh long ago. It resembled a sun crossed by arrows. Around it, faint bruises and burns spoke of years of battle and betrayal. "What truth do you seek, Elara Boone?" Ketten asked softly, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. She took a deep breath. Why you spared me that night? Why your people hid me instead of leaving me to die with the rest? The fire cracked, echoing through the chamber. Ketten rose to his full height, the moonlight washing over his muscular frame, his chest rising and falling like a storm waiting to break. Because you were the sign, he said quietly. The woman from the mountain dreams. Elara frowned. What are you talking about? Ketten reached toward the altar and pulled free an old ceremonial blade. The silver edge shimmered faintly. Our elder saw visions before she died, he continued. A pale-skinned woman would walk through fire and blood and bring the truth back to the mountains. She said the woman would follow a wounded warrior and see something no one else had ever seen. The words sent a shiver down Elara's spine. You think that woman is me? I know it is, Ketten said. Because when you followed me, you saw the secret that must never leave this canyon. Elara looked at him, her eyes narrowing. That chamber under the cliffs. Those bones. They weren't from a battle, were they? Ketten's jaw tightened. They were the ones we sacrificed when the white soldiers came. Our own, women, elders, so the rest could live. The silence that followed was unbearable. Elara's heart pounded as she took a step back. Your people killed them? He nodded once, shame flickering through his eyes. Not for hatred, for survival. The spirits demanded it. We obeyed. She could barely breathe. You call that survival? That's... Ketten stepped forward suddenly, his hand gripping her wrist. His touch was warm, strong, but trembling. Do not judge what you do not understand, he said, his voice breaking with pain. Every life we took has haunted us since. That's why I was wounded that night by one of my own, trying to end the curse. Elara stared into his eyes and saw something she had never expected: remorse. Real and raw. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert, though no rain came. The red moon glared down upon them like an unblinking eye. Ketten let go of her wrist and walked toward the mouth of the cave, his silhouette carved against the crimson sky. You wanted the truth, Elara Boone, he said. Now you carry it. The question is, what will you do with it? Elara followed him into the moonlight, her heart torn between fury and pity. If I tell the world, she whispered, they'll call you monsters. Ketten looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then tell them we were human. The night swallowed his words, leaving only the echo of his breath and the low hum of the wind, a haunting promise beneath the blood moon. The first pale light of dawn stretched across the desert, softening the harsh reds and golds of the canyon walls. Elara Boone stood at the edge of the hidden chamber, her chest heaving, her rifle slung loosely across her shoulder. The events of the past nights weighed heavily on her, the gunfire, the blood, the whispered secrets of a canyon that remembered everything. Ketten, the wounded Apache warrior, stood beside her. His long black hair hung damp and tangled from sweat and blood, his chest still streaked with war paint. The tribal jewelry around his neck and wrists caught the weak sunlight, glinting like a crown of survival. He moved with slow, deliberate strength, leaning slightly against the tall warrior who had flanked him in the battle, but his eyes were alive, clear, and focused. Elara's gaze drifted over the sealed entrance to the chamber. The earth had groaned and shifted the night before, closing itself as if the canyon had decided to bury its secrets once more. Only she and Ketten knew the truth hidden within, the legacy of a people who had endured beyond the cruelty of outsiders. Ketten, she said softly, are you going to survive? He looked at her, the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I will. The land has judged me, and it allows me to walk still. But the canyon, it will not forgive carelessness. Elara frowned. And what about the world outside? The ones who killed, the ones who hunted? Ketten's amber eyes hardened. Let them believe what they wish. The truth will remain here, protected. Those who seek it with greed will find nothing but echoes. A breeze whispered through the canyon, carrying dust and the faint scent of sage. Elara held the clay sunburst charm tightly in her hand. Remembering the old woman's words, "It will burn in your hand if you lie to the land." She felt its weight now not as a burden, but as a promise, a responsibility to honor what she had witnessed. The tall Apache warrior stepped forward, bow in hand. His sharp gaze swept the horizon. "The raiders are gone," he said. "The canyon has spoken. We only need to ensure it remembers." Kenton nodded and sank to a nearby boulder, running a hand across the blood-stained carvings on his chest. "It remembers," he murmured. "And so must we." Elara approached him, kneeling beside the warrior. "I don't know if anyone will believe what happened here," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can explain it." Kenton reached out, brushing a strand of her hair from her face. "Belief is not the point," he said softly. "Understanding is not required. Respect is. That is enough." She nodded, letting his words settle like sediment in her heart. The weight of the canyon, the blood, and the secrets pressed against her, but it no longer crushed her, it anchored her. A hawk cried from above the cliffs, its wings catching the first light. The sound felt like a signal, a call to rise, to leave behind the shadows and step into the world beyond. Kenton stood, flexing muscles taut with tension and relief, and nodded toward her. "You followed blood into the canyon," he said, voice steady now. "You have seen what no one else could. The world will test you. But remember, the canyon remembers too." Elara rose, brushing the dust from her coat. "And I'll carry it with me," she said firmly. "I won't let it be forgotten." The wounded warrior smiled faintly, the first real warmth she had seen on his face in days. "Then we are alike," he said. "The canyon and I will walk with you, even if you cannot see it." They moved together toward the exit, stepping into the early light. The desert stretched endlessly, silent and forgiving in its morning calm. Elara's horse neighed softly from the ridge, and she mounted, feeling the rhythm of hooves against stone and sand as Kenton walked beside her behind them. The canyon walls stood solemn and silent, hiding the truth beneath layers of rock and memory. The blood had been shed. The ritual had been completed. The secrets of the past, the weight of the dead, and the courage of those who endured remained sealed. Elara turned her gaze to Kenton one last time. "Will I see you again?" He looked to the rising sun. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps only in the stories the canyon whispers." She nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. She had entered the canyon a follower of curiosity, fear, and instinct. She emerged a witness, a keeper of truth, and a survivor of a story far larger than herself. The canyon behind them was quiet. The wind carried a low hum, almost like a sigh, as if acknowledging her choice and the promise she had made. Elara rode forward, Kenton walking beside her, into the new day. The horizon stretched endlessly, the desert vast and unforgiving, but alive with stories that would never be forgotten. For once, she felt like she belonged, not to the towns, the law, or even the world outside, but to the canyon and the truth it held. And in that moment, she knew the story had ended, just as it was always meant to.